China-EU talks broken down, China taking tough stance, slapping anti-dumping duties on Brandy. U.S. House passed the Make America Beautiful Act, but America will pay a huge price. This is China's chance to rise. Even after the U.S. and China reached a trade agreement, Europe still hasn't woken up. Recently, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Europe to make final preparations for the upcoming China-EU summit in Beijing. However, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kallas, didn't make good use of Wang Yi's visit to Europe to improve relations with China. Before meeting with Wang Yi, Kallas sharply criticized China, saying that on one hand, China is fueling Europe's war, while on the other hand, it wants to build even closer ties with Europe in the long run. Beijing must address this contradiction. Kallas also demanded China stop threatening Europe's security, referring to China's support for Russia. She criticized China for cyber attacks, interfering in EU democracy, and unfair trade practices. After Wang Yi met Kallas, the official statement indirectly rebuked her remarks. During the meeting, he emphasized that the positioning of China-EU relations is as partners, not as rivals. Cooperation is the main theme and the cornerstone, and there are no fundamental conflicts of interest between China and the EU. They share broad common interests. Wang Yi then shifted the tone, saying that China is not the United States and should not be viewed through the lens of America's path. China's history, culture, and values are different, and differences should not make us see each other as adversaries, nor should disagreements lead to confrontation. Europe faces challenges, but these have never come from China. Wang Yi's point: the US is slapping high tariffs on the EU, so the EU's real challenge is America, not China. Wake up. Back then, the EU, following the US's lead, imposed heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. China retaliated by launching anti-monopoly investigations into European goods, including French white wine. On July 4th, the Ministry of Commerce announced the final ruling on the anti-dumping investigation into imported brandy from the EU. The ruling determined that brandy imported from Europe was being dumped, posing a substantial threat to China's domestic brandy industry. A causal relationship exists between the dumping and the threat of substantial harm. The final ruling set the dumping margin for European brandy at between 27.7% and 34.9%. Starting July 5th, anti-dumping duties would be imposed on brandy imported from the EU. After legal review, the ministry accepted price commitments proposed by EU institutions and enterprises. For imported products meeting conditions, anti-dumping duties won't be imposed. On the same day, because their automotive industry was underdeveloped, the EU pushed for a significant increase in tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Now, they reap bitter consequences. Trump's Great America Act passed in the House of Representatives. American politicians ramped up pressure, and Democrats tried every filibuster tactic, but couldn't stop the bill from passing. Before the House began the final vote on the bill, American lawmakers were already at it until midnight. At that time, it was 4:53 a.m. Eastern Time on July 3rd, when Minority Leader, Democrat Jeffries, finally started his move to delay the passage of the Great America Act one last time. The Democrats took this measure because just a few hours earlier, the Republicans pushed the Great America Act through the House with a narrow margin of 219 votes in favor and 213 against, passing the relevant procedural rules. Jeffries had no choice but to deliver a lengthy speech, hoping to delay the final vote as much as possible, so that his fellow party members could try to sway a few more Republican lawmakers in hopes of overturning the bill. In fact, Jeffries' speech that day lasted for 8 hours and 46 minutes, starting at midnight and going all the way until 1:39 in the afternoon. This speech set a new record for the longest speech in the House, surpassing the previous record held by California Republican McCarthy in 2021, whose marathon speech lasted 8 hours and 32 minutes, 14 minutes less than Jeffries'. However, not long after Jeffries finished his speech, the vote on the bill still went ahead, and in the end, it passed by a margin of just 4 votes, 218 in favor and 214 against. The bill was passed, but it has been highly controversial because it would lead to cuts in federal aid, an increase in long-term debt, and tax reductions for the wealthy and large corporations, among other issues. 2 Republican members of the House voted against it that day. The White House said on the 3rd that Trump would sign the bill into law on July 4th, which is American Independence Day. The Senate version of this Great America bill had already been passed by the Senate on the 1st. Around the Great America bill, the U.S. has already seen several rounds of political drama in recent days. Trump and his campaign ally Musk have been exchanging words and continuing their war of insults, while the Democrats have been constantly opposing the bill, leading to multiple rounds of filibustering and stalling tactics on Capitol Hill. Several Republican lawmakers changed their stance at the last minute during the vote, further highlighting the divisions within the party. At present, this political drama at the Supreme Court has finally come to an end, and the consequences brought about by this bill will arrive together with Trump's official signing. The House ultimately passed the Senate version of the bill, which is even tougher than the version previously passed by the House. Some House Republicans had 3 main objections to passing the Senate version of the bill, but in the end, Trump put heavy pressure on them, forcing them to fall in line and vote in support. Their first dissatisfaction was that the cuts to Social Security spending were too severe. The Senate version slashed even more. It cut nearly $300 billion from the federal government's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. In addition, regarding medical subsidies, the threshold for the medical services tax was lowered, which could affect hospital operations and make things harder for the poor. The second objection was that the debt ceiling increase was too large. The Senate version allowed for a higher debt limit, made conservatives more worried the U.S. national debt spiral out of control. The third objection was about making tax cuts permanent, increase future deficits. The Senate version made Trump's corporate tax cuts permanent, and also used accounting tricks like adjusting the accounting baseline to make it look like Congress was spending less money, when in reality it allowed the government's long-term deficit to keep growing. According to data from the Congressional Budget Office, the Senate version's tax and spending cuts would result in a $3.3 trillion deficit, which is even higher than the previously most lenient $2.8 trillion deficit. In addition, it would also cause 11.8 million Americans to lose their coverage. Overall, when it comes to healthcare, the current Senate-passed version of the bill is even harsher in its cuts than the original version, with longer periods of reduced spending and a much higher increase in the debt ceiling. Senate Majority Leader John Thune was the driving force behind this version. He was extremely tough, insisting that it was either the entire version gets passed, or everyone just goes home. Thune's idea is that permanent corporate tax cuts can stimulate investment and drive U.S. economic growth to 3% annually. This is also the key economic goal that Trump and many conservative Republicans value most. Professor Huang Junbin from the School of Economics at Renmin University of China analyzed that with massive cuts to social spending in the U.S., especially with so many people losing health insurance, the wealth gap in America will only widen further. According to this so-called Great America Act, it includes measures for spending cuts. U.S. budget agencies and economists generally believe these spending cuts are unlikely to offset the fiscal revenue reduction from policies like tax cuts, or the significant increase in defense spending and interest payments. This bill is expected to seriously push up federal debt. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung published a commentary stating the Great America Act will intensify the U.S. debt ceiling controversy and heighten market concerns about America's fiscal credibility. If investors' confidence in the U.S.'s ability to repay is shaken, it could trigger dollar depreciation. This could destabilize the situation and increase risks to the global financial system. To sum up, the first aspect of the Great America Act is that by making tax cuts for the wealthy permanent, it benefits the U.S. stock market. The second aspect is that it targets the poor, widening the wealth gap in America and intensifying political polarization. This will make American society more divided. Right now, it's clear the Democratic Party will use the Great America Act as a major target of attack in next year's 2026 U.S. midterm elections. The third major aspect of the Great America Act is it gives the green light for the U.S. to keep borrowing without restraint, causing debt to keep rising. This will require continued trust in the U.S. dollar, which could benefit the long-term development of the renminbi. If the U.S. reduces debt, China's room for development could be affected. Now, another opportunity for China's rise come.